Good morning. We're in Matthew chapter 26 on this Wednesday of Holy Week. The longest day for Jesus. It went from rooster to rooster. And I want us to see 8 scenes that are recorded for us in Matthew chapter 26. And I want to be a good art guide as we walk through this gallery of 8 rooms with 8 paintings, 8 scenes from the life of Jesus on his longest day, Wednesday, before the cross. The first room we step into is when Jesus is anointed at the meal in Bethany. I just want to point out, I'm going to try to point out just one thing about each scene and let you and Jesus stand there and gaze together. Let me point out verse 13 where Jesus said, "I tell you the truth, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." That tells me that Jesus knew the details would be recorded and that you would be reading them. The next scene, an ugly one with Judas. And just let me point out what I noticed, and that is in verse 15, where Judas says, "What are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you?" In other words, what's in it for me? And that is the antithesis of the cross. As we step into the next room, we notice the Lord's Supper. And what an opportunity for the Lord to speak to you. One thing that I wondered about and thought about as I stood there is when it says in verses 26 and 27 that Jesus took the bread and he gave thanks, and he took the cup and he gave thanks, and he says, "This is the bread, this bread is my body, and this cup is my blood." When he gave thanks to the Father, what was that prayer? Was he just thanking him for bread to eat? Was he thinking about, he had to have been thinking about his body being sacrificed on the cross? What did that prayer of thanks sound like? And then as we step into the next room, where we see Peter being himself. He was chief morning big talk. And he said that he would even go to death with Jesus. What I noticed was the last verse, and that is that in the last few words of that section, the other disciples said the same. So we often pick on Peter because he spoke so quickly. But I noticed that this was not just chief morning big talk. This was the whole tribe, and they all chimed in. As we go to the next scene, the Garden of Gethsemane, what jumped out at me was when Jesus told Peter, James, and John to watch with me. He desires our participation. But you notice that even though they slept on the job, they did not do their part, God's will was still done. So even though he desires our participation, he is not dependent upon it. The next scene is when he is arrested. And in verse 54, you will notice that to Jesus, the Father's word is paramount. In other words, communion with the Father is supreme in his thinking. And then if you go down to verse 64, which you will see as you step into this seventh room and look at this seventh scene of the trial. And what I noticed from that little scene is that future exaltation equals present humility. Now, I know that that formula may seem backwards, but think about it. Jesus said, "Yes, it is as you say." Then he said, "But I say to all of you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on clouds of heaven." Future exaltation equals present humility. And then in the last scene, and we've all been there before, I noticed that Peter said, "I don't know the man." He referred to Jesus as the man. This is the same Peter that a week or so earlier said to Jesus, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then he says to a young girl, "I don't know the man." That is distancing. He pushed Jesus away from himself, referring to him as the man. He might as well have said that man. Well, it's Wednesday, the longest day in Jesus' life. It goes from rooster to rooster. Walk with him on this Wednesday. A day for quality time with Jesus. Walk slow and listen.